I was going to mention this. I think you famously said about the dinner dates side of things, avoiding doing dinner dates.
Yeah, it's the worst.
And, yeah. Well, and this guy said last night, he said, the dinner dates came up, and one guy in the crowd put his hand up saying, yeah, I don't want to keep taking girls out for dinner, and he was sort of saying, you don't have to. And then I spoke to this other guy at the end, and he said, I stopped doing it ever since I read this awesome book. And I was like, is it Paul Janka, How to Get Laid and
yeah.
And he said, yeah, it was. And I just thought, yeah, it was great. But I think what it was as well, Paul, is another guy who was saying as well, he takes girls to the cinema, and I was saying, I think some of these guys just watch movies and see how, in a movie, don't they? They go out for dinner, maybe they go and watch a film, and then they go back to theirs, which won't happen in real life. I don't think you could sit in a movie for 2-3 hours. You're not going to be able to talk.
Isn't that a terrible killer, movies? I've done that in my past a couple times, but a movie is the worst idea for a date because it just kills all the end, and you have no chance to interact with. She doesn't know anything about you or anything.
But I think it's good in a relationship, obviously. And
I
think the purpose
totally
of
different.
the date is to do stuff that you would do if you're a couple. So, but guys think meals, cinema, which are probably what you'd probably do more of if you had a girlfriend, but you don't want to.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah, that's what you said there was an interesting bit. That is what couples do, and what married couples do in long-term. They go to movies, they go to dinner and stuff. But to get into a couple, ironically, you don't want to do that. Yeah. You want to do something or the sexual energy and the sexual connection is much more on the surface. Eating dinner and going to a movie is not a sexy thing at all, generally. So, and you can do that once you're settled into but yeah, in the beginning, it's got to be about the sparks, and you got to keep it really a lot of electricity. So it's got to be drinks or I mean, you want to feel her femininity and see if there's chemistry. So yeah, those two things are terrible. But every guy, because as you said, culturally, every guy goes through that, and you waste a lot of time and money.
Yeah,
it's awful. So let me ask you a couple of questions. The thing about British culture being judgmental, maybe is unfair, but let me ask you how come all these pickup artists in London that I've spoken to, both officially pickup artists and also guys who just chase girls off the record, all give English girls wide berth or have tried it and said it's impenetrable, I can't get in there. Yeah. And they instead go after the Latvians and the Lithuanians and the Polish and the Russian and all the Ukrainian, all the other girls who come here. One thing, if we're generalizing, I mean, those Eastern European girls are often fairly attractive. But tell me other things.
I think that's what, the main thing, obviously you're attracted, I think, more to women who look different. So you walk down the street and you see Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian girl there, you're going to want to speak to her more so than just English girl, I think, because what we're used to. But I don't know if it's to do with their history of failing, but you just...
Failing? Oh, the guys failing.
Failing, yeah. So if you think about me and my upbringing, it's always been with English girls, and you think... And I watched all these videos, and I would always be saying, why are you not meeting English girls? Or straight away, it's that reputation. I think everyone says it's harder, and it is.
Why though? So you think it would be hard? And I have an idea, and I want to broach a topic that's never talked about here, and I talked about it on my podcast a bit in a second. But you would say an average-looking English girl is harder to land than quite an attractive.
It's a mixture of things though. Like I said, I think the attraction is massively important, because if you're more attracted to a different girl, you're going to be more on it and giving it more. But I found with English girls, I don't know, it's just...
Who do they date? Obviously these English girls, a lot of them are actually dating English men.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously still attracted. I think they're attracted to you. My reason that I can back up with is because I used to get so many English girls' numbers, and they would always flake, and then I'd meet other girls and they wouldn't. But this is through day game. I think if I go to a nightclub or as a social setting, more likely to meet an English girl. But I think generally speaking on the street, for some reason, you just don't speak to them. I think it's that 2-3 second, you've got to make your mind up, am I going to go over and speak to that girl? And I think if they generally stand out, they look a lot different. Because a lot of these guys do, they're all living in Poland and around the world now. I think there are a lot more attractive women around the world. And I'm sure, I mean, would I be right in saying this is how your was as well? Was you probably weren't going for New York girls, you were going for more...
Yeah, well, I found Well, what was the last part? I was going for more.
Yeah, was you going? Because I remember you saying on you was dating these women from Europe and all over the world. Were you more likely to go out with those girls than New York?
Well, yeah. I mean, I still to this day, my wife is English and my previous girlfriend was Swiss American and from Switzerland. I clicked more with the European sensibility. The English women, American women, is massive generalization, but I find quite grating and quite harsh, and I don't like the accent generally. And I find them also quite manly. American women, because they're competing with men. So, and even if they're beautiful, there's something quite aggressive I find about American women, and generally speaking, and that turns me off. But for a relationship, but for having fun. But one thing I think that is not talked about a lot is social class. Yeah. And I think that part of the reason English men find foreigners easy is because they're at an elevated position. They're established, they're citizens here, they know the rules of society. Whereas these are newcomer girls and they're like struggling, they're trying to make some money, get their footing. And so he's like an island of safety. He knows the rules, right? He's a local. Whereas you can't do that to an English girl because she knows the rules as well. And so she's thinking, this guy's not gonna, there's no value differential.
So coming in a bit more of a provider than...
Yeah, or just there's strength there because you're like, you know the ropes and it's attractive. Whereas, in other words, an English guy for a girl who just arrived can do a few things, whether it's hailing a taxi or knowing a number to call or like knows a bouncer or whatever, get in and it's impressive. But a girl who's lived in London her whole life, she's like, that doesn't impress me.
Well, I think as well, you mentioned the point of, American women being a bit manly, and that's probably what I would say a lot about the English girls. Also,
yeah.
Because like if you talked about, even you were open saying, for feminism and stuff, we're all, women should be equal and all this, but it's something just turns me off a bit, or I'm not sure if you found this, that when a woman is just so much into a job and trying to lead all the time, and I think when you meet these sort of European girls, Russian girls they're really feminine and they straight away know your role. So the guy who taught me was always like, in certain European countries, it's like the man's the man and the woman's the woman. Whereas
it's a very traditional hierarchy, it's different.
But I think guys, like, subconsciously, we're just hardwired, we're sort of turned off a bit by that, and we'd rather find a more feminine woman, or at least find this woman and make her more feminine, or bring that out of her. And that's the roles it's that sort of masculine and feminine, roles in the relationship.
I agree with that. Do you also think that, like, for the average English guy, like if dealing with posh girls in London who are English, like they're looking to move up. They're looking at like people even more posh than they are. And so they're quite dismissive of guys at their level or below. And so there's that class thing still seeps into it. Whereas a girl from Latvia isn't part of that system at all, so she's just impressed. In other words, I get that sense a little bit, which ties into this other comment that socially I think it might be quite insular, meaning girls will date, they're only interested in the guys that they went to uni with, or their grammar school, or that are from Chelsea also, and they'll date and no matter how good looking or how alpha, they're not really going to pay too much attention to a guy who's outside of that closed, pretty safe environment that their dad and mom want them to marry into. And so in that regard, it's quite insular. Do you think that there's anything to that?
Perhaps if I went and did those, like, meeting women on the street more in West London,
Chelsea,
you'd notice some girls will just walk straight off. So I think women, they've got a way of filtering, haven't they? They're trying to select the right guy, and they're like, look, I'm waiting for this guy who's got to at least have this. See,
that's not talked about in the pickup scene in London. I think that's, we had Yad on our podcast. I think that's, and we talked about this a little, I think that's a huge thing, particularly in British culture, and that's why I think a lot of guys here don't like it, are turned off by certain English women, because they're not an easy target. They have other requirements that complicate the process.
Exactly. That probably straight away in their head is like, I don't want to meet a guy on the street.
Yeah, right.
And like say for example, you obviously you got the looks and you're tall. Straight away that might have worked more in your favor. So more guys who probably, I think even some guys who stop, because girls I've dated, they've said, oh, I've had guys stop me on the street before, and they were just really short, and I just wasn't interested, or they were from such a country. You know, some of these girls in European, not being racist, they're like, I don't want to meet a guy who's got this.
Well, that's the same thing. Yeah, it's all about social class. In other words, like a foreigner is a lower social class, so they want to It's the old Pride and Prejudice thing with Mr. Darcy. I mean, most women want to marry up.
Yeah.
So if they come from quite middle class background in Chelsea, West London, are they really gonna? They're not really looking here, or even laterally. They're looking up. So, and that's more so than in the U.S. In the U.S. in New York, a lot of hot girls, cosmopolitan. I rarely encountered that kind of judgmental, like, excuse me, you're not, please don't talk to me. I'm like, I know what I want. They're quite, girls in New York, if you got the hustle and the look and the energy, they're quite open to it. Here, I would think, I've never chased girls in London, but I would think you have to navigate that element of these girls being quite insular and only interested in guys that they went to uni with or that works in the industry they work in or something.
Yeah, I've noticed. I think generally the street kind of things, it would perhaps, because like you're saying, they're going to judge you straight away and they're going to walk off. But if you just were in a bookstore or something and you started talking to a girl and you talked for her for a minute and you said normally after about 50 seconds, you can tell, but they can sort of tell a bit more about you. And then if you keep persisting through. But on the street, they might not even give you 10 seconds. So if you can give them more of your personality.
Why do you think English, I know the answer to this, but I want to hear your word. Why do you think English women operate that way, whereas an attractive girl from Poland wouldn't be dismissive?
I don't know. I think the English girls, I don't know. I think just the foreign girls are probably more welcome, but it ties into all the points we probably discussed, is they've just moved here, they probably are more open to meeting people. It's probably more so with their culture. I think that all women want to be approached, but I don't know. I think in England, probably more in Western culture, Europe there's that pressure of how they're going to be judged. You know what I mean? I don't know what your point was or what your response to that was. I don't know if I'm looking to it a bit too deep.
No, you're hitting on it. I find that actually the most interesting thing, and I've just clocked that a lot of guys, good-looking guys, English guys, have all avoided English women, and that's raised a red flag to me.
They do bad. I mean, they hook the girls instantly, like you're saying with the looks. I think on the street it buys you a bit more time if you stop a girl, and it'll give you an extra 10 seconds, but then they'll make their mind up and then they'll go.
We could talk about, after you ask me this question, just you hear guys saying they're gonna hold a torch for eternity. They're never gonna settle down. They're gonna be bachelors, and I find like that's kind of why partly why I did this interview, and also why I don't think there's enough mature voices in the pickup scene, or not the pickup scene, but like the men's movement, because young guys, I was very different 10 years ago than I am now. I think that they're quite, well, they just haven't, I've learned, let's say for myself, I've learned things now that I didn't know then about the different stages of life and how things change and stuff. So this idea of like being an eternal bachelor, I think guys really think about it. I don't know if it's that attractive.
George Clooney even tied the knot, didn't he?
Yeah, and it's not so funny. People always hold up George Clooney as an example. You know, George, and it's like, you're not George Clooney, dude. He's like stunningly handsome. He's worth $100 million. Everyone in the world knows who he is. Like, yeah, if you can line up those things, then be a bachelor. But most guys at 50 don't have one of those things.
Yeah.
So they have just a pathetic
It's a lot of work though, because every time you've got to go out and you've got to meet people and you've got to prove your worth, and it's a lot where George Clooney's probably just got, obviously, all the women coming to him.
Yeah, and just forget about his celebrity and the money. Most guys his age don't look like that. They're not tan and relaxed and handsome. They're like overweight and out of shape and losing their hair and don't dress well. I mean, so it's ridiculous. And now you could address those things, but I don't know. I think guys who think they're going to be this, you can be a bachelor as you get older, but I think it's not a well thought out plan for a lot of young guys who just say. But most guys in this who read this stuff, and they come to sexual maturity later, so they're making up for lost time. So they want to kind of like now that they've found something, the Holy Grail, they want to extend it. You know.
So it always comes down, like I was saying, that it's more not necessarily getting married, but being in a relationship, having kids. Because I think generation to generation, you know, when your parents aren't there anymore and it's Christmas Day, I use that example, you want to be with someone you love.
Well, one thing I write about a fair amount is that what basically happens, I already see it happening again here in London with some of my friends. What happened for me at the end in New York, I still had a lot of pull for women. That wasn't the issue, but all my male friends were gone. They were all settled down, and it becomes very lonely. If you don't, this is the most fun when you have another pack of guys to run around with. Yeah. Like chase girls and then meet the boys to talk about the conquest and have steak dinner or whatever. Yeah. Once there's no men to share the stories with, it's quite lonely actually.
Yeah, but then you just feel like, you constantly, if you've got wingmen or you've got mates who are out single, it's like you're always going from new friends to new friends, and you feel like it's getting old. It's like, because you feel like you're repeating yourself if you're constantly getting these guys who are coming in new again.
Well, let's put it this way: when you're my age, I have some friends who are still single. You'd be hard pressed to find any same age guys to run around with, even to have a beer or like shoot the bull. So if you're cycling through these women, you're basically on your own. And the women are come and go. You have no consistency, and what I call no witness to your life, which means no one's in bed, no one gives a shit. Basically, the girls come and go, and you were a fun weekend thing, and there's no men who really say, "Hey, man, how's that job going? Or how are you doing?" It's because they're all married with their kids, families. Yeah. So it becomes I think it's fun between like mid-20s to early 30s, but because that's when mid-30s is when guys start to disappear. And they become, I remember a very poignant phone call with a very good friend of mine when I went to college with like a brother, and we're still good friends, but I had a phone call with him, and I was in LA at the time, and it was a phone call, not a long phone call, and then at the end he's like, I gotta go. Like, it was quite abrupt, because his daughter was crying, or his pregnant wife needed, and I was like, I had that moment where I was like, I'm not a priority in his life anymore. This is like a very good friend of mine. Like his wife and his children and that's what matters now. And I'm amusing, but like I'm not the focus. Yeah. And when you start to feel that from your male friends, the cold wind of loneliness starts to hit you. Like, fuck, no one's looking out for you now.
Because it's a lonely place. I think there's guys out there who live this lifestyle, and they say it's the really dark side, and it's
the road maybe narrows as you get older.
But I think what we concluded overall is that, you know, at the end of the day, the person you trust the most is yourself, and you know, sometimes you could just be back all at square one on your own, but you've always got your family as well. That's what I've always found, is that one of my mentors.
Yeah, but I mean, what are you going to be 45 and calling your mom and stuff and your dad? I mean,
no, but that's what I mean. That's why you would then probably look to start a new family.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, because it's not funny. But that's what I mean. That's what I'm trying to say. If it was just, if you were 45. What I found overall is that you constantly getting closer and closer to finding the kind of woman you'd want to date.
If you use game for that purpose, is kind of ironically how it worked out for me. Is I think every guy should meet tons of girls so that he can skip on a lot of lousy ones and then decide what he wants. And when he sees someone who's really a good match, go for it. Yeah. The problem, if a guy doesn't have a lot of experience, he might marry the first attractive woman who gives him attention, and she might have terrible character or a character that doesn't line up with his. And he got a lot of guys, the young guys who get married, they get totally blindsided by the looks, you know. But that's like, this is a super obvious thing I'm going to say, but most guys don't know this in game. What matters in a relationship is not how the girl looks, really. It's how she treats you and her character. Because once you see her, you live with a girl, you see her every day, you normalize to that. So it's like how she behaves. Does she like clean up after herself? Is she polite? Does she considerate? Like, if she is or she isn't, that's going to impact your day and make you feel irritated or not. Like, so, but most guys, when they're out on the street chasing girls, you're not screening for that. You're just looking for looks, what I call the cosmetics. And if a guy's very inexperienced and he's never gotten attention from a girl, and one attractive woman for some reason gives him attention, and he marries her and she's a disaster internally, then he's looking for, it's just painful, all just awful.
Yeah, and then they try and make it work, and they go to all this counselling and saying, you know. But yes, I guess, Paul, to conclude, where guys can find out more about you and you know what's the future now. I know you said you want to plan a couple of kids, but
next year I'd like to have some little players. I'm going to have little Jankas. I'd like to have a few boys, and I'll start coaching them young. They're going to be like little menaces. But you can if you're interested in learning how to chat up girls and get them in the sack and really hone your game. I mean, my stuff was still relevant and was one of the early sort of Bibles of this field. PaulJanka.com, you can buy that stuff there. And if you're a little older maybe and want to listen to a very interesting podcast I do weekly with a guy named Pete McSweeney, is TakeTheDiapersOff.com. It's also on iTunes. It's about the golden decade of the 30s, how men, I'm 40 and I'm married on the end of that, and Pete's 30, unmarried and an actor, and we kind of talk about, he might have certain ideas and I have certain experiences of how that, and we talk about the choices that a man makes in that decade determines in a massive way, of course, where he ends up. And I think at 30, a lot of men resemble each other in many regards. By 40, that doesn't happen anymore. Like there's guys who lives don't look anything like someone else. Like for example, a guy who went and pursued medicine and now is a doctor and he's got a mortgage and a house with 3 kids and a wife. That's a totally different life than like the day game lifestyle at 40, unattached, living in a small apartment, like getting girls. Like so, those 10 years, the decisions you make determine where you are at 40, and that's the first time now that I'm 40, I can really see that it's like stark difference about certain men made certain choices, other men didn't, and it's like, whoa, it's kind of scary almost, the range. So, very important decade. So for your older listeners, like it's interesting stuff we talk about.
No, definitely. I listened to one, it sounds great on me to catch up on some more of those. But yeah, Paul, it's great, and like saying it's good to see that you've been this transition probably of from living a more of a player lifestyle to, but I think in the history of your life you'd been in relationships in the past.
Yeah, I would never was. Some guys you see here, they might be able to pull a couple girls, but they've never had anything substantial, and I'm always a little suspicious of that. But I've had, like, aside from my wife, I've had maybe 5 or 6 long-term relationships, a year or 2 years. So I've been able to have a real nice functional thing with women. I love being in a relationship, but I also, when I was single, I went after it hard. So I've kind of had both.
Yeah.
And they are very different realities. So, but make sure you don't fall into the trap, just for your listeners, to make yourself alpha, get on the street, pick up girls, but you'll have a very hard time if you ever want to be with somebody transitioning, because that's quite a different skill set. And a lot of guys think, oh, that's boring, I don't want to deal with it, which is fine. But when you're 40, I have friends like this, when you're 40 and you try to learn how to be a boyfriend or a husband, it's not so easy, because you spent 10 years thinking differently. So.
Excellent. Cool.
All right.
Well, it's a pleasure catching up with you, Paul.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, guys, more details, check out the link below. Subscribe to see more of these amazing interviews. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yep.